Okay, this is going to be the first video in a series on the book Works of Love by Soren Kierkegaard. There's already quite a few good video commentaries on this book, but I did want to do my own because there's just more input that I wanted to give on it, and I wanted to do it in a concise format so someone could have a good overview of it, whether or not they read the book. Yeah, and I think it's an incredibly important book, very overlooked, very liberating, just talking about the most important subject, love, about what it actually is and what it is not. And he does this by breaking down different Greek words that are used for love and just describing their relative importance to each other, while also using verses from the scripture, from the Holy Bible, and giving a commentary on those. So we're just going to pick it up in chapter 1. I'm just going to start off. We're just going to go through some quotes that I think are important, and I'm just going to give some commentary on it from notes that I already had taken on it. So he opens the book with a quote from Luke 6:44. "For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush." He goes on to say, "If it were true, as conceited shrewdness, proud of not being deceived, thinks, that one should believe in nothing which he cannot see by means of his physical eyes, then first and foremost, one ought to give up on believing in love." He talks about, we can be deceived in love. And there's people who he says are in conceited shrewdness who don't want to be deceived by anything. And so if they don't want to believe anything that they don't have blatant proof of, then the first thing they have to give up on believing in is love. And by doing this, he says that they end up cheating themselves out of love, which is the most terrible deception. So on page 24, and I'm using the translation done by the Hongs by Harper Perennial Press. So page 24, he says, "He who because of love became a sacrifice to human deceit, what has he really lost when in eternity it turns out that love endures?" We can all be deceived in love. People can be deceived when they're in relationships or just trusting people generally. And they're saying this person can become a sacrifice to human deceit. And he's saying, what have they really lost though? And when in eternity, it turns out that love endures. "Whereas the deception is no more, but one who ingeniously deceived himself by cleverly falling into the snare of cleverness. Alas, even if throughout his entire life he has in his own conceit considered himself happy, what has he not lost when in eternity appears that he has deceived himself?" So yeah, he's just saying, people can get by pretty well if you're not willing to believe in love. So it's like, I'm never gonna believe anything I can't see. I don't believe in this concept of love. He can go his entire life considering himself happy, right? But if it turns out, and he's saying, it turns out that love endures through eternity. So they ultimately deceive themselves. "In the temporal world, a man may succeed in getting along without love. He may succeed in slipping through life without discovering the self-deception. He may have terrible success in his conceit of becoming proud of it. But in eternity, he cannot dispense with love and cannot escape discovering that he has lost everything. How earnest existence is, how terrible it is, precisely when, in chastisement, it permits the willful person to counsel himself, permits him to live on, proud of being deceived, until finally he is permitted to verify that he has deceived himself for eternity." So he's saying love is the fundamental quality of eternity. So the one who deceives others to acquire their love while slipping through life without becoming themselves attached through love really does this to their own demise, because it is love that endures through eternity. So page 26, "No one if he understands himself, would think of saying Christian love that it blossoms. No poet, if he understands himself, would think of celebrating it in song. For what the poet shall celebrate must have in it the anguish which is the riddle of his own life. It blossoms, and alas, it must perish. That which has being cannot be sung about. It must be believed, and it must be lived. So he's talking about the love of the poet, which oftentimes is given symbols about, through talking about flowers and stuff, associating love with like a flower, that it blossoms. And he's saying this is the nature of some kinds of love, which he'll talk about as eros, like an erotic love, that it springs up, it blossoms. Only transitory love, quote, blossoms, and like the flower, inevitably it dies. The poet is essentially a tragic figure who has, quote, for the riddle of their own life, unquote, the task of celebrating love that springs up and dies. The eternal love of Christianity does not interest the poet, as the love they praise has the tragic element of anguish within it. Love that prefers one in the place of all others has to be tragic. This is what romantic love does. It glorifies and exalts one person, loving one person in exclusion of all others. And he's saying that this love is bound to be tragic because this love continuing is dependent on the other person. He's saying that this is the realm of the poet, or oftentimes the love that is praised like by the artist, whether it's music or poetry. This is the love that is most frequently praised in their works. True Christian love has being, quote unquote, and, quote, it cannot be sung about. He says it must be believed and lived, unquote. True love is not sentimentality. It is shown by its fruit, by action. This is why he opens up this section by talking about that passage from Luke. The name of the chapter is Love's Hidden Life and its Recognizability by its Fruits. That's why he starts with this passage. For each tree is known by its own fruit. For figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. And he's saying, in contrast to the poet's love, it's like you can tell what kind of love a person has, dependent on its fruit. And he's saying the true Christian love has being. It has to be lived out. It has to be believed and lived out. It's not sentimentality. It's not writing about it. It's not praising it in song. It's shown by its fruit, by its action. So page 27. As the still waters begin obscurely in the deep spring, so a man's love mysteriously begins in God's love. We cannot learn to love properly without first knowing God's love. This is found primarily in the gospel, with God showing grace and mercy to the undeserving. And this is where we're going to eventually get into the idea of loving your neighbor, which is in contrast to the love often, that we often most often seek, romantic love, right? The love spoken about by poets and by artists, right? So that's an opposition. God doesn't show love and grace and mercy to those that are the most lovely, and what are most by external or more superficial means. What we see as being deserving of love. It's actually his grace and mercy is shown to the world who are sinners when they're not righteous. And they're saying, this is where we learn from. We learn true love from God. We're to imitate God's love, which is, we'll go on to see is loving of neighbor, which is loving of everyone. And it's not based on anything in them. Just like the love that we receive from God is not based on us. For For even if a single particular expression of love, a single impulse of the heart were, out of love, forced back into painful concealment, this same life of love would yet find another expression for itself and would still become recognizable by its fruits. I think here is just saying love, when it's present within a person, it cannot be kept hidden. It will be revealed in some sort of fruit, in action, in some sort of action somewhere. And so he's saying, like, it can't be hidden. Page 29, the Apostle John says, 1 John 3:18, little children, let us not love in word or speech, but in deed and in truth. How can we better compare this love in words and speech than with the leaves of the tree? For words and expressions and the inventions of speech can also be a mark of love, but they are uncertain. The same words in one person's mouth can be very significant and reliable, and in another's mouth as vague whispers of leaves. The same words in one man's mouth can be like, quote, blessed, nourishing grain, unquote, and another's like the unfruitful beauty of the leaves. The essential mark of a tree is the fruit, even if it can be identified by its leaves. The leaves of a tree can be likened to John's statement about not loving in merely, quote, word or speech. These can be deceptive, just as leaves on the tree are deceptive. But the fruit, someone's actions and deeds, revealed what the tree is. Words alone are deceitful. Because of this, it doesn't follow that one who truly loves shouldn't suppress speech and other signs of affection. He says that these motions are, quote, not your possession, but the others, unquote, because in the emotion you belong to them who moves you, and the expression makes you conscious of belonging to them. He'll also say later on page 29 that immature and deceitful love is known by the fact that words and techniques of speech are its only fruit. Saying there's not real fruit in action. But you can actually see immature and deceitful love by the fact that the words and speech are the only quote-unquote fruit that are being manifested from that supposed love. Page 30, consequently, how the word is said, and above all, how it is meant, consequently, how the deed is done. This is the decisive factor in determining and recognizing love by its fruits. Saying the way a deed's done, how it's done. Because it can't just be the deed. The deed could have all sorts of wrong motives. So he's saying how an act is carried out determines whether or not love is present. There's no word or deed that automatically proves that love is present. And so he's saying it's how it's done, which is a subtle thing. Therefore, if any overexcited and enthusiastic or hypocritical person were to teach that love is such a hidden feeling that it is above bearing fruit, or such a hidden feeling that the fruits prove nothing, for or against, yes, even that poisonous fruits prove nothing, then we should remember the words of the gospel, the tree shall be known by its fruits. Sorry, I didn't read that too well. He says, therefore, if any overexcited or enthusiastic or hypocritical person were to teach that love is a hidden feeling that is above bearing fruit, or such a hidden feeling that the fruits prove nothing, for or against, yes, even that poisonous fruits prove nothing, then we should remember the words of the gospel, the tree shall be known by its fruits. So, if someone were to say that love doesn't have to present itself in deeds to truly be there, that the actions that are revealed mean nothing, or that even bad fruit, poisonous fruit, prove nothing about the true nature of someone's love, then this person is deluded, and we need to remember the words of the gospel. The tree shall be known by its fruit. So it's unavoidable. Someone might claim that love is present in a certain situation, and that it doesn't matter if, by all appearances, their actions seem to totally negate this idea. He's saying, no, don't be deceived. The tree is known by its fruit. And that is ultimately how we see whether or not love is present. So let me see here, page 32. Let me find where I wanted to pick up here. In truth, love shall be recognizable by its fruits, but still it does not follow from this that you are to take it upon yourself to be the man who knows. Furthermore, the tree shall be recognizable by its fruits, but it does not follow from this that there is one tree which shall take it upon itself to judge the others. On the contrary, it is always the individual tree which ought to bear fruit. Yeah, and I think here he's just saying we're not to be fruit inspectors. He said instead we're supposed to be the ones bearing fruit. We're not supposed to be here setting ourselves up as the one who judges everybody's fruit. I think there are times when you have to use discernment and you do have to look at fruits. Just in situations in life, we just can't remain totally ignorant to these things. Sometimes there's pivotal decisions that need to be made, and we have to judge by a tree by its fruit. But I think ultimately that's not supposed to be what we're going around doing. We're to be busy bearing fruit, not judging the fruit of others. Yeah, I have here, the one who fears God and is afraid of his own propensity for hypocrisy, quote, has never been deceived by a hypocrite. What do I mean by that? Let me see. The one who fears God and is afraid of his own propensity for hypocrisy has never been deceived by a hypocrite, because God shows us what real love is, and we know from our severity with ourselves what dishonesty looks like. Because of these, we can recognize deceit, hypocrisy in another. We should, as discussed in the very beginning of the chapter, believe in love. Oh yeah, he says that elsewhere, that that's that one who's that we can be someone who's, quote, never been deceived by a hypocrite. We all have a propensity for hypocrisy, and so that person can be more aware of someone else's hypocrisy, and God shows us what real love is. And we know from the severity that we are with ourselves what dishonesty looks like, right? Because we know our own behaviors, and if we really fear before God and we're really convicted by what he shows us, right, we'll see the own hypocrisy and dishonesty in our own life. Because of this, we can recognize similar behaviors in other people. But because of that, doesn't mean we should be going around judging the fruit of others. We should be believing in love. I think, Paul says somewhere, Apostle Paul says in one of his letters that we're to believe all things. Not that we're to be naive, but I think ultimately we want to give people the benefit of the doubt and continue believing in others and believe in love. Page 32, do not forget that it would be a beautiful, a noble, a holy fruit by which love in you would become known, if in relation to another person whose life perhaps bears sorry, I'm going to reread that. Do not forget that it would be a beautiful, a noble, a holy fruit by which love in you would become known if in relation to another person, whose life perhaps bears poorer fruit, you were loving enough to see it as more beautiful than it is. So love sees the love in others, even if it is inferior, as greater than it is. He's saying that in itself is very loving. If you see love in others, even if it's an inferior kind of love than what you're used to, trying, it's lesser than sort of the standard you might have. He's saying when you see that as greater than it is, that's very loving. It is also more blessed to believe in love than to see its fruits. Believing in love is what transforms our perspective of others and actually calls forth love in another person. And this is something that will be talked about more later. The last section, the last couple sentences on page 33. Therefore, the most blessed, the absolutely convincing evidence of love remains, love itself, which is known and recognized by the love in another. Like is known only by like. Only he who abides in love can recognize love. And in the same way, his love is to be known. So we'll just leave it there, and we'll just pick up with the second chapter, You Shall Love.